Hey everyone, it's Colleen, the Preparedness Pro. I'm here for our pop-in today. Hope everyone's doing great today on this Friday. And I have a lot to talk to you about today. I got a very interesting message, and it got me thinking. I was pontificating. And I thought that I would talk about that in today's message. But first, I want to talk about what day it is. Does anybody know what day it is? It's Published Author Day. I'm officially a published author today. It's kind of cool. However, having said that, don't go buy the book today, because remember I said word is the devil. Yesterday I said that word is the devil. Protect your kids. Don't let them anywhere near word, because it's the devil. I know, I'm just being loony. Yeah, so when I uploaded the manuscript via Word, KDP Amazon decided to modify the Word doc and changed all the table of content page numbers, just off by one or two, but they changed them. And even though the pages were right in the master, they weren't right in what loaded to the actual book. So I finally figured out at 4:00 this morning how to outsmart the system. And so I loaded it up as a PDF instead of Word, and it worked. So it takes Amazon a couple days to approve new content that you upload. So wait till Monday, get the best copy that you can. And for those of you that wait, I put an extra little surprise in there too. I thought, well, heck, if I'm uploading something new, I might as well give them something extra to wait for. So there's something extra in there that you want. Trust me, you want it. Anyway, wait till Monday and then get it. Yes, definitely get it. Share it in your preparedness groups that you're a part of, and your church groups that you're a part of. And I think this book will be excellent because it's not a gloom and doom book. It's a come on, let's do this together. Come on, you can do this. Let's get our kitchens prepared so that we can have a meal no matter what's going on that tells us everything's going to be okay. And so that we don't spend too much money, so that we can reclaim our pocketbooks instead of the insanity that's going on at the stores right now and with all the inflation. And so that we can reclaim our health and have say-so in what's going in our food. Those are the three reasons why I wrote the book, is taking back control. So you don't need a crisis for that. We're in a crisis. Those three reasons are crises. Anyway, so I think that because there's humor throughout it, it's lighthearted, it's not SOS survival guide. It's nothing like that. It's lighthearted, but information that you can rely upon. There's some humor twisted in there. Twisted is the key word. There's some compelling thoughts as well. And I do go over the 10 principles of preparedness at the beginning, because we've got to keep kitchen preparedness in its proper perspective. But I think that will set it apart from everything else in its genre. So I think that will be received well in the industry. So I'm hopeful anyway. Okay, so let's get serious now, okay? We're going to talk about who can you trust, and how do you know? How can you know that you can trust someone? And how do you deal with someone that you can't trust? So I figure that's something that we could all get a little help on. Whether it's anything to do with preparedness or not. I hope that I'm going to give you some solutions today. And I would love your feedback as we're talking here. Hopefully I can see it. I'm not a really good multitasker when I'm on this, because believe it or not, I get a little nervous on here. I probably wouldn't have last summer, I was 25 pounds lighter. So I was a little bit more free. I lost 125 pounds, but I gained 25 back. No, I'm just kidding. That doesn't make any difference whatsoever. No, but I do get a little nervous. Anywho, I'd like to hear your feedback, but we'll get going here. Not everybody can just stop what they're doing and listen to Colleen. I mean, my gosh, some of you have lives. So let's start with the premise that, of course, I believe in the whole love thy neighbor thing. It's not just a thing, it is a mantra. I do believe in it. But nowhere in the scriptures are we told to trust our neighbor, let alone trust them with our safety and security. That's a whole other matter. We are told to love our neighbor. But if you look at Joseph in Egypt, I mean, Joseph of Egypt, he's the epitome of wonderfulness. I mean, he's amazing. He's the epitome of faith. I mean, gosh, I just love the story of Joseph in Egypt. And yet, even he, when he had his brothers in front of him, he's like, well, let's give him a test to see if I can trust them. See, even he had to figure out whether or not he could trust them. So he wasn't falling for that whole love your neighbors means that I have to trust them as well. So let's talk about the history of neighbors. And I'm going to go a little dark on that. We're going to go to the Hitler regime. Because you have the neighbors of the Jews, the so-called traitors, and they were actually the greatest asset to Hitler's intelligence operations. Hitler used, as you know, all manner of lies and propaganda and intimidation and bullying to get regular, everyday citizens to betray their neighbors to the Reich, for either being a Jew or being sympathetic towards the Jews. So it wasn't just the Jews that were persecuted. It was those who were sympathetic towards the Jews as well. So if a particular person were to betray a significant number of their neighbors, then they would actually be awarded additional food rations and other favors that were irresistible to some people. And it was during a time of scarcity and poverty and chaos. And so you can hear the rationalization of what these people might be saying. I'm just trying to feed my kids. I'm just trying to stay out of jail. I'm just trying to stay off the radar. I'm just trying not to cause any trouble. Can you hear those excuses? That sounds perfectly rational, right? This has a lot to do with mental fortitude. It has a lot to do with spiritual preparedness and mental preparedness. So here we have, as a result of the harshest of living conditions, many Germans would actually wrongfully accuse a neighbor of being a sympathizer, simply so that the informant could put a meal on the table. And there's lots of history substantiating this, lots. So let's go to 1940, Soviets. When they first occupied Lithuania, they did so under the deceptive position of liberation for the Lithuanian people. But there were some citizens that didn't fall for that. And they were wise to the true intents of the Soviets. And they saw the, looming Nazi regime. And these patriotic Lithuanian people worked very bravely and very selflessly to escape that what they believed was going to be certain enslavement that was in store for their nation. And they were naturally motivated to warn their neighbors of what they saw. It's important to note that the Soviets in the Third Reich, though, they did not tolerate lukewarm loyalty from any of their counterparts. And the KGB rightfully believed that if a person was not vehemently supportive of the Soviet occupation, then such a person was a dissident. and thus likely to compromise the strength of the Soviet plans for world power. So, as such, if neighbors were not regularly providing the identity of other persons as resistors to the Soviet regime, then they would find themselves cast with this hue of suspicion themselves, and they would be considered as a rebel sympathizer and subsequently tortured to death. So let me say this another way. If they didn't tattletale on enough people, then they were concerned that they were rebel sympathizers and they could be tortured to death just for that. So there's a lot to be said for what you actually get out of a person when you torture them. Can you imagine somebody not being able to stand the torture and saying, fine, my neighbor so-and-so is a rebel sympathizer, when he wasn't, just so that they could stop the torture. So it was primarily through this means of intelligence gathering, if you can call it that. You never get truth out of torture, but this intelligence gathering that by the end of the war, the KGB and later the Nazis killed nearly 96% of all Jews in Lithuania. All because there would rarely be a man to stand up and have the courage to trade their own life for freedom and friendship. They turned their fellow Jews in. 96% of them were cleaned out. So today, in stark contrast to the charm and the friendliness of the citizens in Lithuania, there's actually a museum of genocide victims. And this museum tells of the all too familiar story of neighbors turning on neighbors, and usually in the name of some false sense of morality or financial gain. And in this case, hundreds of thousands of Lithuanians and Poles were brutally murdered for standing up to an evil and suppressive regime throughout all those years. I think it's ironic that this museum is established in the former KGB headquarters, where tortured and murdered persons were represented coldly by just a name and a location, by the very people that they celebrated, prayed, and wept with. So I find that very interesting. As an aside note, I also find it interesting that the Soviets felt so threatened by opposing points of view, even though a sparse few of the resistors were armed with any type of weaponry. It was simply their beliefs that the Soviets felt were so dangerous to their evil objective. So I find that interesting. I don't share this information with you to remind you of some horrible blemish on the history of humanity. Rather, I'm just trying to remind you that such circumstances are not apt to be isolated solely to history. History is likely to repeat itself. Any stressful or catastrophic future event is just as likely to challenge the strands of decency that we bear. And as I've said time and time again, desperation and fear cause people to do unspeakable acts. And thus, in the interest of preparedness, I feel that it's important that we recognize that the friends and neighbors with whom we share our preparedness efforts and plans, that they need to be chosen wisely and prayerfully, because our lives may well depend on it. And I realize, of course, that when one catches the spirit of self-reliance and independence, we desperately want to share those convictions with other persons we care about. I mean, that's why I do what I do. I literally fret at night, wondering, am I making a big enough difference? Am I talking to enough people? And I'm sacrificing some privacy, obviously. I'm sacrificing some secrecy, even. There's certainly a strong case for wise stratagem in converting our own neighbors and friends to a state of preparedness for our own sakes. Obviously, those who are properly prepared are less likely to compromise our own reserves, right? And there's neighborhoods, communities, I should say, that are being set up throughout the US that I know of. I'm sure it's not just limited to the US, where community members are screened. They are viewed for their ability to be self reliant, they're viewed for their talents. They buy property, and they're there to be self sufficient with the rest of the community members. I mean, that's a pretty idealistic situation. But it's idealistic. Not everybody can just up and move or wants to this community. And I feel like we can't be the salt of the earth, so to speak, if we all gather in communities and don't help anybody else figure things out. Because I do think we have a responsibility to help people figure things out. And I believe we can do that prayerfully. And I believe that when we are doing what we are prompted to do, to get better prepared to live a more self-sufficient life, I believe that pleases the Lord, and he gives us some added protection as well. So I think that there's some bonus points there. However, I still think we all need to prepare for a plan B in the event that some anticipated loyalty and bravery does not hold firm. So, I encourage people not to be free-flowing with specifics of the fruits of your self-reliant state or plans of relief until you're certain, spiritually and mentally, that such information will be held properly by somebody who's not a coward, because cowards spill the beans really fast. Now, so how can we know? Well, probing questions. We called these find out questions when I was serving a mission in the Philippines. You want to know what people know, and you can't just say, "Tell me what you know about preparedness." They need to be probing questions. You want to know how people think about certain issues. You want to know. So, have you ever thought about what you would do if there was an earthquake? That's a great question. Find out what they think about. Have you ever thought about what you would do if you lost your job for 9 months? Probing questions will really help. Not only that, but they will help them. It'll gnaw at them. Imagine the pillow talk that night. Joe asked me an interesting question today about what I would do in the event of an earthquake. I don't know. I gotta tell you something that just really floored me. When I was on the Anderson Cooper show. Now, this is Anderson Cooper, okay? The man has been all over the world in all kinds of scenarios of unrest, war, disaster, everything. And you know what? He doesn't even have extra water. He doesn't have anything. He doesn't have a 72-hour kit. He doesn't have any preparedness. And yet, God has given him all of these dress rehearsals that he's seen for himself. But he thinks that he's untouchable. He thinks in his fancy apartment, sorry, I'm being judgmental, but I just was floored by this, and I'll repent later for being judgmental. But he just thinks he's untouchable. And here he is interviewing a bunch of preppers. And I mean, he was just such a hypocrite about it. It was just so interesting being on his show. So interesting. Knowing full well that here he's had all this exposure and he hasn't done a darn thing to prepare himself. Not a darn thing. I mean, with all his money, he could be prepared out the wazoo and sleep well. He could do the lazy preparedness meaning just buy your supply of food and water and XYZ equipment. There are packages that you can do like that if you've got the money. You can just spend all the money, have everything, and forget about it. That's not really being prepared, but okay. But he doesn't. He's lacking principle number 1 and principle number 2. And that's why those are first and second principles of preparedness. So anyway, sorry, I was on my soapbox. He's definitely not what I would call a brave soul. He's definitely not someone that I would feel like I could trust. If he's that thick in the head and hasn't seen fit to follow some of the nudges that he's gotten. Anyway, okay, our own mental fortitude. Let's talk about that for a second. There's a lot to consider in this respect. Who can I trust? I submit that there's an even more important question that we ask ourselves while we have the peace and comfort to support such an exploration. That question is, who will I be under dire circumstances? I think that's a more important question. Who will I be under dire circumstances? I'm not the only person in the world today who's ever been painfully betrayed by friends. I know that. I know that's just one of life's lessons that we all get. We get painfully betrayed by close friends. Sometimes it happens more than once. Sometimes it happens with the spouse. Sometimes it happens with somebody you've been in business with for 25 years. I mean, it happens. In fact, I dare say that some of my escapades can make for a pretty compelling autobiography, but I know that I'm in good company, though, with exceptional men and women like George Washington and Tecumseh and Grace O'Malley. And then, of course, you've got the be-all and end-all, Jesus Christ. I'm not an exceptional recipient of these circumstances. Betrayal comes, but more importantly, that what may be thrust upon us by the cowardice of others, I feel it's vital that we ensure that we possess the appropriate amount of spiritual and mental preparedness to maintain a strength of character in all instances. And if you freak out because you're in dire circumstances, you're missing principle number 2 of mental preparedness. You need to ask yourself, am I going to betray somebody else for a meal? Will I stand up for another's freedom by surrendering my own life? Will I be decent so long as my children's lives are not in jeopardy? I feel that considering, a series of possibilities will do a lot to strengthen our mental fortitude. So it doesn't require a lot of time on Facebook or in front of the news to realize that there's a lot of people surrounding you who don't believe in self-reliance, freedom, independence like you do. But worse, there are a few persons who are willing to work hard to establish a healthy state of preparedness and then back up that with the courage of their convictions, with bravery in light of torture, starvation, or embarrassment. Instead, they feel emboldened with a sense of entitlement that simply because you have, they should receive. And this is really pervasive. This thought process may not seem life-threatening today, but under the cloud of war and famine or other challenges, it may seem perfectly rash to a weak mind. So, love our neighbors? Certainly. I believe that because of such a love, we're required to forgive them their wrongdoings. In fact, I believe that the scars of those who were betrayed so cruelly during the Second World War will be healed contingent on the measure of forgiveness that they extend to their traitors, as well as the scars we carry by betrayal in our own lives. But let's understand that you've got the parable of the 10 virgins. You've got Jesus' betrayal by Judas, the sellout of Joseph in Egypt by his brothers, and a lot of other, thought-provoking scenarios that my thoughts aren't provoking right now. But they're only addressing the loving of our neighbors. They're not addressing blindly trusting them. In fact, in the case of Christ and Joseph in Egypt, we are given all kinds of examples of carrying cautiously in light of human betrayal. In light of all these points, I feel that there's a great deal of wisdom in the admonition of trusting not in the arm of flesh. In fact, we are warned of this reality in the scriptures, as we're told that even brother shall fight against brother, and even the strongest bonds between a woman and her own child will be shredded, amidst times of turmoil and trial. I personally like my neighbors a lot. We talk over fences, we gather at celebrations. Christmas time, we all exchange homemade gifts of love and loveliness, and everything's hunky-dory. But it's a very different outlook when I ask myself if I could trust so-and-so with my life and my freedom. And unfortunately, there are only a handful of people in this world that I feel I could answer affirmatively. And as such, I either need to get to know them all better so that I can have a more accurate judgment, or I need to be wise in my decisions of who I can trust. And I need to bring in more people in my community. And the way to do that is asking those probing questions, and then using my spiritual preparedness and my mental preparedness to determine whether or not those questions merit me proceeding further in educating them. Saying, I believe in preparedness. I believe in self-sufficiency. What does that mean to you? Ask them. I believe I have a solemn responsibility to care for my family and friends. I think that's part of me fulfilling all of our purposes here on earth. When someone says, I don't want to be prepared. I don't want to last through whatever hell life brings us that requires me to be prepared. I think of that and go, well, that would be nice if I could just skip through that trial. But what about the whole endure to the end? That's one of the commandments too. So I expect to endure to the end the best way I know how. There's a reality for what we must mentally prepare for so that we can peacefully anticipate a day of turmoil without losing our emotional strength. We have a greater ability to be at peace if we acknowledge that such a compromise of trust could happen to us. So think about that. We will be more at peace if we acknowledge that there will be a compromise of trust. It's wise and even peaceful to face this reality, so long as we harbor no hatred or fear of those who would violate our trust. They're children of God too. They just don't get it. They are a choice people too. They're just not at the same door that you're at. They're just not living the same way you are. They're not making the same choices you are. That doesn't make them scum of the earth. It may make them a liability to where your goals are, but that doesn't mean you have to trust them. We need to accept that vile brute force can and frequently does triumph over kindness, love, and decency. It does happen. So just accept that as a part of life. I mean, the Polish and Lithuanian Jews were annihilated by something called Einsatzgruppen. And they didn't believe that something so atrocious could ever happen to them. But George Washington didn't believe that Benedict Arnold would betray his country in exchange for so little financial gain, relatively speaking. And Chief Tecumseh didn't fathom that anybody would not want the Indian nations to be unified in strength and peace. After bravely conquering entire armies of men who threatened the destruction of Ireland's civilization, Grace O'Malley never expected her own son to betray her into the hands of prison. And, back to Christ, he had the foreknowledge of Judas's betrayal. It still brought him to tears of sorrow. But that didn't shake Christ's peace. All of these persons were able to thrive in peace and victory in spite of having people around them that they could not trust. And with a little caution, we too can endure anything that life throws at us, in spite of fickle, fine-feathered friends. So that's just the thought that I wanted to leave with you today. And I hope it makes you think. Ask yourself, who will you be under dire circumstances? I think that's a more important question. That's your mental preparedness. That's your mental fortitude. Do you believe in cannibalism under any circumstances? Do you think there's ever the right circumstances for it? Those are the kind of things that you need to think about. You need to decide today, not when things get tough. You need to have your moral compass set in stone. Go through some scenarios in your head, make those decisions, and just accept that not being able to trust people is an acknowledgement, and that you need to be at peace with it. Bring people into the fold if you can by asking probing questions. If you can educate them, the Lord will guide you. So that's my piece for today. May your trusted friends be many and your preparedness efforts be even more abundant. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.